Hi, my name is Nikki Graycal, and I am a Common Core facilitator for LA Unified. I'm also a parent of an 8-year-old, so I wear both hats, and I see what it's like. He's unfortunately for him, he has a mom that's a teacher because he's always saying things to me. Mom, stop trying to teach me. No matter what I do, we're reading a book. We sit there, we're reading reading something like Tale of Despero, and I say, why do you think the author chose to put that in that text? Because all authors do things for a reason. And he says, Mom, stop. And this morning he says to me, Mom, why are you going to work today? Because of what I was wearing, he thought that looked like a work outfit. Anyway, I wear both hats. So Maureen gave a historical, kind of set up a historical understanding of where Common Core came from. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the ELA standards. But first I'm going to talk about college and career readiness. So are we college and career ready? Around the same time before Common Core kind of started taking effect, Janet Napolitano said, America couldn't lead the world in innovation and remain being competitive if we didn't have an internationally competitive education system. The states were all over the place, and so Common Core is serving to kind of level the playing field. And Common Core state standards establish a clear, consistent guidelines for what every student should know and be able to do in math and English language arts from kindergarten through 12th grade. And Common Core focuses on developing the critical thinking, problem solving, and analytical skills students will need to be successful, skills that are necessary for college and beyond. So the whole purpose of Common Core is to make sure that all kids in the US have access to the same information so they can be globally competitive with all the schools in Asia and New Zealand and all the places that are very successful. So there's these shifts that have happened, and they're called the Common Core shifts. They exist in math and they exist in ELA. Today I'm just talking about ELA, which means English Language Arts. So the first shift, and that means that things have changed from how they used to be. So when we were just teaching the state standards, we did things one way, and these are the big changes that are occurring now because we're doing Common Core. So the first thing is we now are going to read complex texts with academic language. So what that means is the books will be harder, and there's this thing called a lexile that kind of levels how hard books are. So we use that with Common Core. And that academic language is imperative. So, for example, there's different tiers of vocabulary. Tier 2 words are words that are words like describe, categorize, words that you can use kind of like in any content area. So those words are very important for us to teach because, especially with English language learners, we take for granted that they may or may not know what describe means. So words like that we have to teach. Other tier 3 words are more content specific. So it might be like something like deforestation would be a tier 3 word. So the second shift is reading, writing, and speaking is grounded in evidence. This is a huge, huge thing. So when you think of what college and career readiness is, when you go to college, you don't just cite your opinion, you have to support it with evidence. So evidence is something that is, in my opinion, one of the most important changes from how it used to be to how it is. And so as teachers, we used to always have kids make connections, we'll read a story, and so what's your connection? We called it a text-to-self connection. And kids would say, oh, I have a sister who's named Margaret. Well, who cares? Great. So that means nothing, right? The connection is really about, well, maybe the character did something and feels a certain way, and then you connect to that, so that helps you understand the character better. So it's really like bringing it away from connections and it being sweet and feel good to, well, what does the text tell you? Thus, that's why I get on my son's nerves. So, and the third thing, shift, is called build knowledge through content-rich nonfiction. So my understanding of the reason why we're moving more towards nonfiction is not because somebody doesn't like literature, but because when you go to college and when you are an adult, you really read a lot of nonfiction, right? You need to be proficient at reading nonfiction in order to be successful, in order to be able to get a job, in order to be able to do your job well. So when you think of college, there's a lot of nonfiction reading that's going on in college. Now, if you're a lit major, that's different. You're going to be reading a lot of literature also. But just in your general classes, there's a lot of nonfiction you have to read. So that's my understanding as to why nonfiction is such a huge, important drive with Common Core. Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit now about the anchor standards. So the anchor standards are the holy grail. They're the light at the end of the tunnel, okay? This is where we want all of our 12th graders to be when they go to college. And there's 4 different areas within the standards. And there's 10 standards altogether. So in kindergarten, it's the same 10 standards as there are in 5th grade, as there are in 7th grade, as there are in 12th grade. The anchor standards are always the same no matter what grade level you're in. And it's the end result. It's the goal. The anchor standards also are the same whether or not it's fiction or nonfiction. So when you're reading literature, you have the same anchor standards as if you're reading nonfiction. So it makes it much easier for teachers if you memorize the 10 standards. You don't have to keep learning new things with the old standards, like what Maureen said. It went on for pages and pages and pages. So this it simplifies things. So the first kind of bracket is called key ideas and details. So I'm going to have you actually with me read this. So in the red, I will have you read, and then I'll read the black. Okay? So. To determine what the text says explicitly and make logical inferences from it. When writing or speaking to drawn from the text. So this, standard number 1 is all about the evidence, right? It's all about citing evidence. And so it doesn't matter if you're in kindergarten, it doesn't look exactly like this in kindergarten, or in, 11th grade. You are still going to have the essence of citing evidence exist in teaching and what the students learn. Number 2 is determine of a text and analyze their development, summarize the key supporting details and ideas. So standard number 2 is all about theme, central message. And it could be a historical theme or central message if it's nonfiction, or a scientific one, or it can be the theme of, friendship or kindness if you're reading just a literature read aloud. So number 1 is cite evidence. Second standard is about central message or theme. Number 3, analyze how and why and interact over the course of a text. So this standard is all about character. It's about if it's literature, it's about characters, and what makes characters tick. If it's nonfiction, it might be more about like historical characters. Then the next bracket is craft and structure. And so what ends up happening is teachers do a pretty good job of these first 3 standards. But the next set of standards are standards that they don't know about, or they don't feel as comfortable teaching. In my experience, when I go into classrooms, that's what I notice. So craft and structure is really about like author's craft. So standard number 4 in red, as they are used in a text, including determining technical, connotative, and figurative meanings, and analyze how specific word choices shape meaning or tone. So this is a really important one, because this is all about, like, why did the author choose the word that she or he chose, and how does that shape the tone? And Exactly, right? And so I've done lessons with kids on tone, and it's great for them to be able to kind of see why an author chooses things. Why is that important that the author chose to use that word or keeps repeating a line over and over and over again? Like if you're familiar with the book Chrysanthemum, she's that Kevin Henkes, the author, is constantly repeating. Chrysanthemum, chrysanthemum, chrysanthemum. And sometimes she says it like with an excited tone, and sometimes she says it like she's really depressed and she's like on the ledge. So it's important to know that authors choose words for a reason. Number 5 is about, analyze including how specific sentences, paragraphs, and larger portions of the text, example, a section, chapter, scene, or stanza relate to each other and the whole. So standard number 5 is all about text structure, whether or not it's nonfiction or whether or not it's fiction. And so thinking about text structure, lots of stories, they start one way and they end exactly the same way, right? So you start with, there's a book called The Relatives Came by Cynthia Rylant. And she starts off with the grapes were purple enough to pick in Virginia, and then she ends exactly the same way. So that's like, it's the same beginning and the same end. Whereas some books, they flash back. So you're reading something, and then all of a sudden it goes back in time. So that's something that kids need to know, is that authors write things with a text structure in mind. And then number 6, assess how or shapes the something and the style of the text. My anchor got the content, maybe context. So point of view. So why is this, one person has one opinion, another person has another opinion or a viewpoint or perspective. And then the third kind of bracket is called integration of knowledge and ideas. So number 7 is to integrate and evaluate content presented in and formats, including visually and quantitatively as well as in words. So this is really like the technology standard. This is saying, we need to make sure that kids are exposed to these standards in both print, but also in digitally. And number 8, delineate and including the validity and the reasoning as well as the relevance and sufficiency of the evidence. So this is really, so much critical thinking goes into this, because you have to look at an argument, you have to evaluate it, you have to see what the claims are and and realize if they're valid. And then 9 is in order to build knowledge or to compare the approaches the authors take. So standard number 9 is making those connections, not to, oh, my cousin's name is Margaret, but, oh, I see in this book, this theme is the same as this theme, and making connections in that way. And then finally, number 10 is so again, this goes back to complex texts, books that are challenging. So not something that, not back to like Dick and Jane, where there's no meaning and it's just easy to read. There's substance to the text that we read, and it's based on really like the qualitative and quantitative measures of a text. So before we go on, I just wanted you to talk to a partner, someone near you, and just kind of summarize, 3 things you learned about the anchor standards. So before we go on, one point that was brought up of a parent of a 5th grader was, that there is it's still important to teach background knowledge. So we educators call that schema. We need to build the schema of the students because they still need to know about things. It's not like you never, when I went into a classroom and I was doing a lesson on word choice, and it was in a school that was low income and English language learners, and they were going to read an article about Katrina and about the tsunami in Japan. And so I actually showed them some videos of what hurricanes and tsunamis look like, because I thought, they might not know certainly what a tsunami is. They probably know what a hurricane is. But I wanted to make sure that they had that background knowledge. So it's not to say that you don't ever do that. And the other thing that's super important is that teachers need to scaffold, because this is really hard. So you can't just expect that they walk in 5th grade and that they can do all this stuff. And skilled teachers really know how to do this. They know how to break it down so that it's not so challenging, or they have stepping stones so that the students can actually achieve the standards. So right now we're just going to look at one anchor standard. We're going to look at anchor standard 1, the citing evidence one, and I'm going to just show you how it changes from kinder to 12th grade. So I'm going to skip a grade level. I'm doing only the even numbers, but you'll see. So in kinder, citing evidence, this is what it looks like in kinder. With prompting and support, ask and answer questions about key details in a text. So it's just asking and answering questions about things that are happening in the book. I don't know why. I have like the ghost in here. It just keeps, I'm not even touching it. So in 2nd grade, so 1st grade looks a little bit different. And then in 2nd grade, it now is ask and answer such questions as who, what, where, when, why, and how to demonstrate understanding of key details in a text. So you can see how it gets a little bit more rigorous. Now it's about more asking questions and the specific questions to ask. And then in 4th grade, we see refer to details and examples in a text when explaining what the text says explicitly and when drawing inferences from the text. So now the word inference is introduced, and then the word text is introduced, and so you can see it's getting explicitly, so they have to be very specific about what they're talking about. And then in 6th grade, it actually says cite textual evidence to support analysis of what the text says explicitly, as well as inferences drawn from the text. So you can see like the difference between kinder and 6th is quite great, right? So citing evidence in kinder is just answering questions about a book, whereas in 6th grade, they are now analyzing what the text says explicitly. In 8th grade, they cite textual evidence that most strongly supports the analysis of what the text says explicitly, as well as inferences drawn from the text. So here, there's more. It's still talking about inferences, and then there's also more supporting analysis. So you can see like 6th grade and 8th, it's just getting a little bit harder. And then in 9th and 10th, the standards are the same. So in 9th and 10th grade, cite strong and thorough. So those adjectives are added in. So it's not just citing evidence now, we're citing strong and thorough evidence to support analysis of what the text says explicitly, as well as inferences drawn from the text. And then finally, the 11th and 12th grade, also they're the same, is that cite strong and thorough textual evidence to support analysis of what the text says explicitly, as well as inferences drawn from the text, including determining where the text leaves matters uncertain. So then there's this whole added thing about when a text isn't explicit, you need to see those implicit messages too. So again, wait, we want to go back. I want you to just talk to a partner again about what you notice about how it changes from K to 12. I'm going to very briefly talk about the writing standards. So again, the writing standards are 10 standards, and there are 3 text types, which are genres, right? But Common Core calls them text types. So the first one is argument. Argument is number 1 because in the authors of Common Core think that argument is the most important of all. Number 2 is informational and explanatory. And then number 3 is narrative. So those are the 3 different text types. And so I don't know if any of your kids do Writer's Workshop, but in Writer's Workshop, it's quite easy to kind of cover all the writing standards. Number 4 is task, purpose, and audience. So why are you writing? Who are the people? Who's your audience? And what is the purpose of why you're writing? 5 is the writing process, so going through, okay, we're going to draft, we're going to then revise, we're going to edit, and we're going to publish. And there's a difference between revision and editing. Revision is when you make something more interesting, or you change, you might change vocabulary words. It's really about making the text more interesting, whereas editing is really about fixing mistakes, like, oh, I'm going to put a period here, or I spelled this word wrong. And then technology, here's technology again. So technology, you have to think, like, if you're college and career ready, you need to know how to use technology to show your thinking. And so the other thing that I have learned working in LA Unified is that I am a digital immigrant. But our kids are digital natives, right? They came out of the womb knowing how to use that iPad and the phone. My son knows how to do everything, right? But I am learning everything. So, and I assume that, we all are kind of like that, because when we were kids, it wasn't around. We had TVs. We had the phones that were connected to the wall with the little curly thing, right? And so this is all new to us, but to our kids, it's not. It's like we knew how to use a TV immediately because it was always there. We didn't know what life was like without a TV or a light bulb, right? So then research projects, number 7 is about researching. And then 8 is credible sources. So this is also very important because you can go online and you can research lots of things, but it doesn't mean that it's going to be a credible source of information. So it's teaching kids to know when something's credible and when something isn't credible. And then standard 9 is about drawing evidence. So what is the evidence to support your thinking? And then finally, number 10 is to write routinely. So it's really important to write daily, to write all the time, and across content. And then, so a special place for argument in the standards. Argument is the soul of an education because argument forces a writer to evaluate the strengths and weaknesses of multiple perspectives. So when you think of college and career readiness, argument is incredibly important because it's all about critical thinking. You have to analyze what the situation is. You have to make a claim, and you also have to make a counterclaim. So that's a much higher thinking process, right? It's not something that's simple to do, and it takes skill. So that is why argument is so important in Common Core, and critical thinking is necessary for argument. And so anticipation of claims, when you argue, you have to anticipate what the claims are and the counterclaims are. And then it's really necessary for college and career readiness, as I said. So the other standards, I'm just going to briefly tell you what else is in ELA. So there's language standards, so that deals with conventions, grammar, and that kind of stuff. Okay, yeah, sorry. So listening and speaking. So discussion is super important. And then reading foundation. So that's really K-5, phonics and stuff like that.